Good morning, Peter. How are you?
I'm fine, and good evening, Jeanette. How are you across the
I'm
world?
fine too. From across the world, indeed.
Right.
And also, of course, a warm welcome to everybody watching and listening today. It's another episode of the Narrative Tradition podcast, and today the whole episode is about the embodied Enneagram. And for this reason, I'm going to interview this time Peter, because without exaggeration, we can all say that, Peter, you are a distinguished authority in the field of the embodied Enneagram. I know you as the embodiment of humility as well. But for 25 years, I've witnessed how you have trained countless certified Enneagram teachers in this field, including myself. Moreover, Peter, you have inspired many teachers to dedicate themselves to the profound work of the embodied Enneagram. And since the 1980s, you have worked alongside Helen Palmer and Dr. David Daniels, together with Terry Saracino, to grow the Enneagram school in the narrative tradition. You've also played a pivotal role in bringing the Enneagram professional training program to many places around the world, helping to establish the narrative tradition globally. And you also have an impressive 46-year career as a body therapist and educator in the embodied Enneagram. So you have an extensive experience and deep understanding of the intricate connections between body, mind, and personality. And that has made you a sought-after expert in somatic psychology and Enneagram studies. Through your work, Peter, you have empowered countless individuals to achieve profound personal healing, growth, and transformation through embodied practices. And I noticed that just for me paying attention to all of your career, you already try to disappear right now, which you can't because we're in the middle of a recording.
That's funny.
Yeah, and to finish this off, as Enneagram, we are deeply grateful and proud that you make time to support the continuation of Enneagram trainings and the narrative community in Europe. So let's get to the topic of tonight, the embodied Enneagram, something that's so close to your heart, Peter.
Okay, right. Well, thank you for that long introduction, Jeanette. And yeah, it's kind of fun to hear back. It's like, yeah, I've been in this work a long time, and I'm still here, and I'll be here for a while, not forever, but as much as I can, as the time that I have available, I want to spread the good understanding and methods of the embodied Enneagram. So I'm happy to get to talk to you about that today.
Yeah. So, and I think after so many episodes of the Narrative Tradition podcast, I think it's really about time that we dedicate at least one whole episode to the embodied Enneagram. And I think that many wonderful colleagues, Enneagram teachers, can say that everybody has its own contribution to the work and its own signature. And I think that the embodied Enneagram, that's really your topic, your specialization. I would like to begin from the start. I'm a type 1. I love to do things in chronological order. So can you share with us how you first became involved in body therapy? Because that was also before you learned the Enneagram, right? What drew you in the first place to this field?
Well, I was living in Maryland at the time and active in a number of social justice movements. It was a turbulent time, and one of the things that I noticed was that as we were forming our groups and our collectives, and of course I lived in a group house with a lot of wonderful young people, very idealistic. What I kept bumping into was the problems that we had in communicating and cooperating amongst ourselves. And we were one of the better organized groups. But there was a lot of psychological dysfunction and a lot of, hard stuff going on. A lot of, I won't go into the details, but what I noticed in myself, of course, is that was also in me, that I had had a difficult childhood. I came out as a type 8. and not one of the nice eights. I was kind of one of the very angry young eights. I mean, I had a nice side to me, but I was confronted by my group at one point. It says, look, we love you, but you got to change. It was an early intervention, that I was fortunate to have because I knew that they did love me, so that got through. And then I had to actually work on my anger issues and my rigidity and all the stuff. And so I had a job working as a counselor for the state of Maryland in a crisis intervention center, peer counseling center. And so I'd been interested in peer counseling and self-help work. And but what I realized at some point that for me, I thought, well, probably for other people too, but certainly for me, that the talk therapy or the talk counseling would only go so far. It was really important, and there was a lot of jumping in and looking at patterns, but I was really kind of caught up in my body. I had a lot of tension, a lot of holding patterns in my body, and even if I wanted to get into my feelings, my body would fight me. But I had a lot of what I'll just say body armor. That was a phrase from Wilhelm Reich. More on him later, perhaps. But so I needed the body work, and I got involved in some early body work in the East Coast, and then in 1975 moved out to Berkeley, California, to study holistic health, but also particularly the body therapies. And I had a lot of great teachers at that time. It was a good time to be in Berkeley, and a lot of these things were, it wasn't just body therapies, but many other techniques and methods were being established and talked about, and people could get training, and it was just a very fertile time. So I spent some years in training with people who really knew what they were doing, and became a practitioner in holistic counseling and body-based bodywork, but more than bodywork. I was trained in bodywork and the hands-on bodywork, but bodywork, of course, is part of it. But when we look at it in the context of body-based psychology, then it's a body-based therapy. So I wasn't just doing the body work on people. There were actually other people better than I was at that. But I was also able to kind of hold it in a psychological space, and actually in 1977 started a holistic center in Berkeley in a large dance studio, which later or soon thereafter became very important for the Enneagram, the early Enneagram work.
Yeah. Before you move too fast for me, I think it's very interesting what you share with us. Like, I think for many of us, and what I hear also now from you, it started with your own journey, that you needed it at first for yourself. And when you decided to go for professional training in the holistic counseling, in the body work, was that to continue this for like a healthy path for yourself, or did you already decide that you wanted to become a practitioner and have your own practice as a body therapist?
Well, we were already, I was already practicing in Maryland to some degree. And then I came out with my partner at the time. The two of us climbed into the Volkswagen bus with two cats, and I had a lot of hair and beard, and we were hippies, but we were responsible hippies, you might say. And we got out to Berkeley thinking we were only here to learn and train. But within a quick time, we realized that the kind of work we had been doing on the East Coast, like men's consciousness groups, women's consciousness groups, which we had been adding the body stuff to, and nobody was doing that in Berkeley yet. So we set up, we went back into action. What we knew how to do was to be group facilitators and counselors to some degree, but adding in the body work to those groups. And within a short period of time, it was really remarkable. Within, 4 or 5 months, we had 5 weekly groups. We had a dance program. We were very hooked up. It was, a very welcoming space in Berkeley at the time. And so we quickly moved into a position of continuing our practice as group facilitators, and also as now we added the hands-on body work.
Okay. So you did both from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then again, opened a center within 2 years, and the center, of course, was great because we had it was the biggest dance studio in Berkeley. As an 8, I was happy. We got the biggest studio, and we could have a lot of programs and workshops, and we also rented it out to other people would come through. Many of the leading teachers of the day would rent space, and of course we got to, add in, and it was an exciting time.
And what I understand from you, the studio had a big impact too.
Right.
What you also like, of course.
Right. Unfortunately, that big studio was 12 years later, it was so big we couldn't afford it anymore because, of course, the rents quadrupled, and people with the small studios are still there. So that's a joke on me as type A, right? Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but then again, we met up with people like Helen Palmer, who was a teacher of intuition and a teacher of meditation, and she was doing some psychological teaching at one of the local universities, small university, John F. Kennedy University. Anyway, she was a an introduction to the inner work. I mean, in other words, the kind of going inside and knowing yourself from the inside out and training to some degree. And she was a kind of a respected mentor for many of us. She knew a lot of people at the time, and anyway, she called the house I was living in, another group house, and in 1978, and said, "There's a class happening here in Berkeley, and you should go." And so, of course, we went because it was Helen. You said, "Okay, whatever." And it was the Enneagram. It was the first public Enneagram class that was taught by Kathleen Speeth, Dr. Kathleen Speeth, who had been Claudia Naranjo's associate and really a developer of the modern psychological Enneagram. And she needs to be recognized for that. She left the work some years later, but anyway, she was the first person to kind of do public classes. And we were there, and it was very exciting because, she was interviewing panels. Every week there'd be a different group of people on a panel. And I thought it was a pretty cool way to learn psychology because, it was interesting. And then it got to 8 night and I kind of fell off my chair, So anyway, so other people have that experience too, when they realize it's like, oh my goodness, there's other people who see the world like I do. And I was very happy for about 2 months, and then the other shoe dropped. It's like, there's a lot of work here to be done.
Okay, that's what you mean with yeah. So let's get back to the topic of the embodied Enneagram.
Sure.
Just like the previous podcast, when we interviewed Sharon Ball, we already became aware that actually all of us had a different profession the moment that that the Enneagram came into our life. So you explain us now how your journey started as to become a body therapist and doing the group work, and the Enneagram entered your life. When did the integration start for you? Did you integrate the Enneagram in your profession, or was it the other way around? Was it from the beginning?
Well, it took a while. I mean, it was from the beginning, but of course, it took a while to really get up to speed. I mean, as people know, the Enneagram, basically, it's a map, right, of not only personality types, but character structures. And it's such a great description of the human community. And so when we were learning the Enneagram, and, again, a lot of the early classes came to our center, and it was all year round. There was a lot of Enneagram work going on, and Kathleen Speeth was teaching, and Helen Palmer started teaching, and so we were immersed, not only individually, but as a community. And so there was a lot of Enneagram talk and exploration. And of course, I began to look at my clients from the view of the Enneagram, with the understanding of the Enneagram, as early, even though I was, of course, still a beginner, but understanding that I could approach people differently. I mean, that's not new today, and we understand that people need to be approached differently because there are differences, profound differences. And one of the problems in having a great method, I had a great method. I was doing Reichian bioenergetic bodywork, and it was a great method. And the problem with that, of course, is that you want to fit people into the method or use the method on everyone. And, that's, of course, legitimate. But at some point, I mean, we could have probably realized that without the Enneagram, but we realized that we could approach people very differently based on their Enneagram type. And in fact, that made the work so much more effective and so much more efficient. And it allowed us to understand, oh, this person has not only different issues and different patterns of thinking and emotion, but also different patterns in the body. right? That we were working with a holistic approach. And then the Enneagram came along, and it was also a holistic system, right? Because it carried the understanding of people in terms of head, heart, and body, right? Three centers of intelligence. And so it fit very well. And so we began to, I'll speak about myself. I began to look at my clients from a point of view of, where is their breathing pattern? Where are they holding tension in their body? What is their pattern of body armor? How does that connect with their emotional habit? And it was just a great help in my practice. And at the same time, of course, we were working together and doing a lot of work on ourselves. So it was a very intense time. Those late 70s, early 80s.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And what I understand now from you is that it was like at first you integrated the Enneagram in your work as holistic therapist.
Right.
And at what point did this started to swap around? Like when you learned the Enneagram, was there already so much attention and awareness of the importance of the body work?
No, it had mostly come through the psychology of the types, and there was not a lot of emphasis placed on the body. Of course, there were always subtypes. The instinctual subtypes were there right from the beginning. So there was the instinctual exploration, and of course we would do many workshops with Dr. Speeth throughout the year. And I mean, she was great. She would take us through all the different parts, and we, spend time with the instincts. So in that sense, there was some attention to the body center. But in terms of my framework, and my framework also connecting, I mean, I learned this from teachers and people who were also working with this, that had not been connected yet. And so I think I had the advantage of being able to connect it, not only with my thinking about it and the theories about it, but also because I was practicing over the years. Of course, I met every type, every subtype multiple times, and actually, often, not always, I would actually be putting my hands on people, and it was like a tangible, tactile, a sensing experience. It's like, oh, this type is showing up in this way, and that's the same kind of pattern in their body. Similar pattern to the same people of that type, just as the emotional habit and the habit of mind were similar people of the same type. So I learned a lot practicing people.
So how did you start to integrate all your knowledge, all your experience, all your skills to the teaching of the Enneagram?
Right. Well, I was, we weren't really supposed to teach the Enneagram back then. It was like Claudio, it was all Claudio, and Claudio didn't want anybody else teaching. Of course, he learned it from Oscar Chazo, and Oscar Chazo said, only me, I can only teach the Enneagram, not that Claudio Norano guy. And Claudio, it's like they were kind of, they want other people teaching the Enneagram. But what's it? The cat got out of the bag? Is that the expression? Anyway, Kathleen Speeth, who had been working with Claudio in his group for a number of years, Seekers After Truth. Claudio had a group and a community there, and when she went her own way, she decided she was going to teach the Enneagram, and so she did. And so at a certain point, about 3 years into my work with her, she said, well, you can do a study group on this. And so I did. I began a study group in 1981, and that was how I began. And a couple of years later, she actually moved out of town because she'd been doing all the panel work and the teaching, but she moved out of town. And so I stepped in and started doing some panel work in the, I don't know, it must have been 83, 84. And this didn't directly involve the embodied work per se, although I started bringing that in as I was teaching. So it was kind of a slow development over the years. And then again, I had this great training with Kathleen Speeth and also Helen. And I had a big space and there was a community. And so we kind of weaved it into everything that we were doing. So
So,
I started actually teaching panel classes somewhere in the early 80s. I forget when. And that was
so
great.
yeah. So if we focus today on the work with the embodied Enneagram, can you take us on your journey when and how you started to integrate that in the teaching of the Enneagram? Perhaps it was in the Enneagram professional training program.
Well, I came to the Palmer Daniels Enneagram Professional Training Program in 1991. And so I had already been teaching the Enneagram for 10 years. And I knew Helen and trusted Helen, but there was this guy there from Stanford, a professor of a psychiatrist. And I'm like, I'm coming from kind of from a radical therapy background. And I'm like, well, who's this guy? And why do we need a psychiatrist? And anyway, it turned out this was Dr. David Daniels. And within a day of meeting him, he completely won me over. And so, and of course, Helen and David were always interested in incorporating some of the body stuff in their training. And so, I and others would do kind of we do some, half an hour body work once a day, or, stuff we learned from Aikido or Tai Chi or, dance or yeah. And so we started working in some of the body stuff pretty early on. But the thing that stands out for me was in 1994, there was a big conference at Stanford University. And about 1,400 people came from all over the world. It was the biggest conference and still the biggest conference in the Enneagram. And it was very exciting. And one of the things that I got to do was um, I had a couple of presentations to make, and one of them was the Embodied Enneagram. And I got to take over the Student Union building one afternoon on Stanford. It was a really fun thing. All the students were going by on the outside periphery, and they're looking in at us. What are we doing? And so I was able to get everybody, and then we must have had 50, 60, 70 people there. And so we were all doing the stretching and breathing exercises and connecting our experience to our Enneagram type. And so that was an official debut in a larger public arena with the Embodied Enneagram. Had a handout, So that's when I first, I think, what I remember in terms of presenting something in that big way.
And well, of course, I know that you have a 3-day course in the Embodied Enneagram, even a longer course for people to certify. As I said, it's like a teacher program for the Embodied Enneagram.
Mhm.
Did you also teach this in the Enneagram professional training program? I remember in my training there was an Aikido teacher indeed.
That's right. That's right. Not in the way that no, it didn't. I, like other people, I developed a particular specialized approach, and there just wasn't room in the training program for everything. I mean, it was so intense the way it was, the 12-hour days.
So I just wonder, you so often hear those two terms, the Embodied Enneagram and the somatic Enneagram. Is that completely the same, or is there a difference, or is this just two different words for the same thing?
Well, people use them in somewhat different ways. It's basically the same thing, soma meaning body. And somatics was a field that started out here in the Bay Area, and now it's, of course, spread. But um, I always preferred embodied, in part because I thought somatic was kind of a newer term, and maybe people wouldn't, know what it meant. But I can see other people using the somatic, like Marianne Gilbert, my dear friend and colleague, who uses the somatic Enneagram for her program. And, we're totally aligned on the principles, and her approach is different. That's all. She has a somewhat different approach. It's completely, complementary to what I do, but she has her own teaching style and her own priorities. So, but in terms of the terms themselves, um, no, I don't think there's really a basic difference.
Perhaps we could invite Marion one day to tell more about her approach. But
That would be fun. Yeah.
yeah, that would be fun too, indeed. So I think it's interesting to understand what the difference is. So can you tell us more about what's so specific about your approach with the Enneagram?
Yeah, I mean, it's developed over the years, but I'm still it's still very important to me that people have emotional expression. And that's not something that everybody would support or wants to do, or I mean, it was there in the 70s and early 80s. It kind of went away for a while. Now it's interesting. I see a new method that's being talked about online called the um, emotional awareness and expression therapy. So the therapists have got a hold of it now. They made it an official, which I think is great, because I think it's one thing to actually sense our bodies. That's a big part of what we do is we sense our bodies, we get into our bodies. But also I think it's important that we express that we're human beings. And so we need to have some aspect of emotional expression. So expression and containment, to have that balance between containment and expression, I think is really important because some things need to be discharged and put out of our bodies. Things that we have accumulated over years in childhood and adulthood, and some of the holding patterns, the body armor, the breathing issues, the emotional stuff that we're carrying around. I think a lot of that has to be expressed. So that's not when people talk about body stuff or somatic stuff, they don't always include that aspect. And that to me is really important.
So is this to me, this sounds more like this in the beginning of the work, what we need is the inner healing. Is this what it's about? To discharge indeed everything that's built up from childhood. With Cheryl, we talked about the trauma work. Is this what it's about? So that
Yeah, that's what it's about. Right. And of course, we've learned a lot over the years. I've learned a lot over the years how to do that in a way that's more graceful, that's more supportive, that's more balanced. In the early days, it was like maybe we pushed too hard and everybody wanted to. But anyway, I mean, I remember primal screaming, for example, primal scream therapy, which even I knew at the time. It's like, I mean, yeah, primal screaming, that's a good thing once in a while, but to make a whole practice out of it, primal screaming every day was kind of over the top. But anyway, so we learned a lot as we went along. And we learned also the Enneagram helped because it showed me, and also my colleagues, that we needed to approach people from a very different point of view, right? For example, if you're working with a type 8, for the most part, 8s need to have pretty direct contact. They need to be challenged in a friendly way, not in a, but, like, and kind of challenged around our patterns. And oftentimes it's our anger, and we're using anger maybe as a way to avoid our vulnerability and to get into our grief. But there needs to be kind of direct approach. Whereas working with, say, someone who's a type 5, you go in slowly. And I learned from teachers who were different Enneagram types, by the way. That was fascinating because, of course, everybody kind of approached the work from their own Enneagram type. And not entirely, but that was important too, to understand that methods developed by different teachers usually reflected their Enneagram type in terms of their approach. So, but we could actually alter our approach and we could understand what people needed by understanding more about their Enneagram type.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for sharing. This was very interesting. And I'm very, very sure for people watching and listening, been very entertaining and educational.
Okay, Jeanette, thanks for having me.
Thank you all for watching and listening. And we hope you will be back with us at part 2 of the Embodied Enneagram.
And in part 2, we talk about what is the Embodied Enneagram and why is it important.